Pets often bring us so much joy, love, and comfort. But when your pet is a cold-blooded predator with a killer instinct, sometimes the joy, love, and comfort go out the window. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. Thousands of people die from snake attacks every year. Most of these happen in parts of the world where people live within the snake's habitat. But a proportion of snake attack victims keep these animals as pets, and things go disastrously wrong. 14-year-old Aril was about as passionate about reptiles as you can get. What began as a hobby collecting dangerous snakes became an obsession. By 2017, he had around 20 snakes in his home. He often posted photos of himself handling the snakes and was a member of a non-profit organization that used the snakes in street performances to raise money for people affected by natural disasters. But on December 11, 2017, Aril posted his last two photos. He had reportedly been giving his pet king cobra a bath. Aril had been struck by the cobra and posted a photo of the puncture wounds on his arm, blood trickling from the broken skin, and a shoelace tied just above to form a makeshift tourniquet. The caption read, "Between life and death." And he was right. One of his friends responded to the message and rushed him to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, Aril called 911 and explained what had happened. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff and waiting for more than an hour for antivenom, Aril could not be revived. But it isn't just snake venom that can kill people. Sometimes the most fearsome snakes are the constrictors. Gypsy was a Burmese python. She was kept in her tank by 21-year-old Jaron Hare and her boyfriend, 35-year-old Charles Darnell. Despite claiming she was a beloved pet, the couple hadn't fed the snake properly in over a month. The tank was filthy, and when pythons get hungry, they become dangerous. The snake was secured in his cage by a duvet thrown over the top, loosely held down by some bungee cords and safety pins. She was known to escape, and Jaron often found the snake slithering along the corridor or in the bedroom. She clearly hadn't considered the consequences of this on her 2-year-old daughter, Cheyenne, who lived with them. On the morning of July 1, 2009, Charles woke up to find Gypsy coiled around Cheyenne in her cot, the jaws open wide as it was about to swallow the 2-year-old whole. Charles shouted for Jaron and rushed to grab a 6-inch knife and a meat cleaver. He stabbed the snake, desperately trying to get it to release the toddler. Eventually, he unwrapped the reptile, but it was too late. Cheyenne lay blue and lifeless in her bed. The couple's negligence had ultimately caused the toddler's death. The snake weighed just 13 pounds. 130 pounds lighter than a snake of that size should have weighed. It was starving and saw the toddler as a much-needed meal. Jaron and Charles were charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. People don't seem to realize the strength of the constrictors they keep. A 911 operator received an unusual call in July 2017. A woman from Ohio, clearly in distress, dialed 911 when a boa constrictor she had rescued the day before was stuck to her face. The woman was used to rescuing such snakes. She kept 11 rescued reptiles in her home, dedicating her time and money to providing them with the care they needed. But just the day after rescuing one boa constrictor, the snake struck out. Within a split second, it had coiled itself around the woman and latched onto her face. Knowing that it was near to impossible to pull the snake off and that she could lose consciousness if it cut off her oxygen supply, the woman hurriedly dialed 911. Emergency services rushed to the address. Despite trying to pry the animal off, they weren't able to, so a firefighter used his pocket knife to cut off the snake's head. Incredibly, the woman was all right and arrived at the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. On August 5, 2013, Jean-Claude Savoie agreed to let his son's friends, 6-year-old Connor Barth and his 4-year-old brother Noah, sleep over. His apartment was above his pet store, Reptile Ocean. Inside the pet store, Jean-Claude kept his pet African rock python. It was an impressive animal measuring 12 feet 3.7 meters long and clearly well cared for. But as the young boys slept together in the same room with Jean-Claude's son in his own bedroom, the snake escaped its enclosure. It slithered through the ventilation system above the apartment and then dropped down through a broken duct immediately above where the two young brothers were sleeping. In the morning, when Jean-Claude went to check on the boys, he found the snake coiled tightly around them. They were covered in blood where the snake had bitten them repeatedly, and they were blue. The snake had killed them in their sleep, asphyxiating them by squeezing their tiny chests and necks. Jean-Claude was arrested, but 3 years after the tragedy was found not guilty of their manslaughter by negligence. While Jean-Claude was considered a snake expert and cared for his reptiles well, others weren't necessarily of the same caliber. 25-year-old Amanda Black was a self-professed snake expert. She worked at a local pet store and had a collection of the reptiles at her home in Virginia Beach. Amongst her collection was a 10-foot Burmese python, a 12-foot dwarf reticulated python, a 13-year-old Mexican king snake, and 2 green tree pythons. One of her favorite snakes was Diablo, a 10-foot reticulated python. Any expert snake handler knows that you should never handle a snake like that alone that measures more than 8 to 10 feet long. But Amanda needed to administer some medication to the snake, and her naval officer husband was away at the time. On October 21, 2008, Amanda carefully opened the tank and gently reached down to the snake. She lifted it out and placed it on the floor. But before she could reach for the syringe, the snake had coiled itself around Amanda's leg. It squeezed tightly, and Amanda tried to carefully uncoil it. The snake had done this before, especially when it was younger. But now, at 10 feet long and weighing 20 pounds, 9 kilograms, Diablo wasn't as easy to handle as he used to be. When the constriction grew tighter, Amanda knew she needed to act fast. She began to get rough with the snake, pulling at it, but this only angered Diablo further, and it moved its way up Amanda's body, beginning to constrict around her waist, and then her chest. It was only a matter of moments before Amanda lost consciousness and fell to the floor. When she didn't show up for her shift at the pet store, her colleagues grew worried, but it was her husband who discovered her when he returned from work that evening. It was a terrifying and gruesome discovery, but one that could have been avoided. 31-year-old Dan Brandon was yet another pet owner who fell victim to his pet snake. He owned Tiny, an African rock python, in his parents' home in Hampshire, England. Along with Tiny, he also kept 9 other snakes and 12 tarantulas. He was gentle and kind with his animals, but on August 25, 2017, when he let Tiny, now measuring 2.4 meters, 8 feet long, out of her cage, the unthinkable happened. She was his favorite snake. Whenever Dan's mom, Babs, would walk into his bedroom, Tiny would hiss defensively at her. She would sometimes mock strike, and Dan would tell his mother to be careful. But that fateful day when Babs was cooking dinner downstairs, she suddenly heard a loud thud. She went upstairs to investigate. When Dan didn't answer, Babs walked into his bedroom and found him face down on the floor. Tiny was out of her cage and coiled up in the corner. The snake that he had cared for so long had turned on him. Another passionate snake owner, 23-year-old Patrick Von Allman from southern Indiana, went into the shed to treat his 14-foot, 100-pound reticulated python from mouth rot. He had gotten the python as a pet 5 months ago and was an experienced snake handler, having grown fond of the animals since he was a young boy. When Patrick didn't return to the house for 3 hours, his family went to see what he was up to. When they walked inside the shed, they found Patrick face down on the floor, unresponsive with no pulse, and the python crawling around out of its tank. But it's not just snakes that are kept at home that turn on people. 29-year-old student Eric Arrieta was working a night shift at Caracas's General Francisco de Miranda Park, a small zoo in Venezuela. It was August 2008, and Eric, who was fascinated by the 10-foot Burmese python, broke the one cardinal rule. He let the snake out of its enclosure. He wanted to pose for a photo with the snake, but as he picked it up to place it around his shoulder for the ultimate shot, the snake struck out. The more Eric tried to fight back, the tighter the snake squeezed, until the student could breathe no more. The world went dark, and he collapsed on the floor. But that wasn't the end of it. When his co-workers arrived to check on things, they found Eric's lifeless body next to the enclosure, with the snake still coiled around him and its mouth wrapped around his head in an attempt to swallow him whole. While it's easy to blame this attack on the stupidity of the student involved, no attack is more stupid nor more preventable than the following. 18-year-old Austin Hatfield from Florida loved showing off to his mates. In the ultimate daredevil stunts, he would capture snakes and kiss them in front of the camera or in front of his friends. But in April 2015, he took things a step too far. He managed to capture a cottonmouth, a snake that, although rarely fatal when it bites, causes one of the most excruciatingly painful of snake bites known, and if left untreated, can cause permanent nerve, heart, and kidney damage. He'd lay on his back and place the snake on his chest. But before he could kiss it, the snake kissed him. It struck him on the face, and Austin was rushed to Tampa General Hospital in critical condition. He survived the ordeal, but should perhaps consider another way to show off to his friends in the future. It isn't just the handling of snakes that can be a dangerous exercise. Feeding them can be too. Brothers Grant and Lamar Williams from the Bronx bought a pet python in 1996. They took turns to look after it, and while the snake never attacked their pet cat, the brothers enjoyed feeding it live food. The snake had enjoyed liver rabbits before, but in October 1996, when 19-year-old Grant was looking after the snake, he decided to try something new. He walked across the street and bought a chicken. A live chicken. When he got back to his house, the snake went mad for the new food. He could smell the chicken immediately. But when Grant set the bird down in the hallway for the snake to capture, the snake launched itself at him instead. It had been sent into a frenzy by the smell of a fresh meal, but while the chicken had immediately run away, Grant hadn't moved. It secured Grant in his jaws and immediately began to wrap itself around him. He was found dead by a neighbor, and emergency crews had to pry the snake off him to release his body. More often than not, it's natural instinct that leads to these incidents. Debbie Grudzinski was a wildlife rehabilitator. She lived in Seguin, Texas, and she had cared for a 14-foot boa constrictor named Yesenia for 8 years. She was always careful around the animals she looked after, but she felt like she and Yesenia had a special bond. That bond was about to be broken. When Debbie reached in the snake's tank to top up its water, it suddenly struck her, clamping onto her hand without warning. Within a second, it had coiled all the way up her arm, about 7 feet of the animal gripping onto Debbie. The blood pressure built up, and Debbie could feel herself growing faint. Her daughter immediately called emergency services, who arrived and attempted to sever the snake's head. Before they cut all the way through, however, the snake released its grip, and both Debbie and Yesenia survived the ordeal. Debbie isn't going to be looking after snakes anymore. Her family is too important to her, and she has a new view of the reptiles she once loved. She said, "Why are you trusting an animal that is cold-blooded to have any feelings toward you? They don't feel love.